All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. Today, if you hadn't guessed from the title, I am going to be doing an in-depth review of Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen. The new adventure just released the digital version by Wizards of the Coast. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this content and the other content on this channel, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on. All those things are super important. Let's get going. Something I thought was rather interesting about Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen is, as I said before, this is an adventure, not a campaign setting. To give you an example of kind of the difference, Curse of Strahd is an adventure, whereas Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft is a campaign setting. And because of that, they are very, very different as far as the things that they're going to provide to potential buyers and the things like that. And I think a lot of people, when they heard that Dragonlance was being released in 5th edition, thought it was going to be treated very similarly to how Eberron was, where Eberron got a campaign setting. But Eberron has not gotten an adventure specifically, like a campaign specifically set in Eberron, or at least hasn't gotten a hardcover campaign. There is an Adventurers League campaign series that you can play that is all set in the world of Eberron. But as far as actual like hardcover adventures, Eberron got a campaign setting, and that's how they introduced it to 5th edition. Dragonlance is getting the exact opposite. They get an adventure instead of a campaign setting, which I guess is an interesting choice. Dragonlance itself has been around for a really long time. I believe the first Dragonlance novels came out in like the 80s, the late 80s, I want to say. There was a 3rd edition version of Dragon. There was definitely a 2nd edition version. There's a 3rd edition version of Dragonlance. 4th edition did not update the Dragonlance setting, and then now we have it in 5th edition. So yeah, as with all my in-depth reviews, they are exactly that, in-depth. And when I say that, I mean that I go into the book very in-depth. I go chapter by chapter. I say the things I like. I say the things I don't like. I say the things that I think they did well. I say the things that I think they need to improve on. But a lot of people don't want to listen to an hour-long video just to figure out, well, should I buy this or not? So, near the beginning of all these videos, I have a section called Should I Buy This? And I separate potential buyers into 3 different groups of people. The first group of people are players. Players, for my definition, are people that are primarily going to be sitting at a table playing a single character. They're not going to be sitting behind the GM screen, but they are going to be actively physically playing the game in some way, shape, or form. The next group of people are Dungeon Masters, DMs. They're the people that are going to be sitting behind the DM screen. They generally are going to have different wants and needs for a product than a player is, because they don't have to build one character, they have to build a world. And then finally, the third group of people, which is often overlooked, are what I call lore hounds. Lore hounds are people that are really interested in the setting itself and kind of the lore and the mythology built into the system, more so than the mechanics. They may never actually sit down and play a game, but they really enjoy reading basically the stories that develop from RPGs in general. So, should you buy this? Well, let's talk about that. The first group, should players buy this? As I mentioned in my little brief introduction, this is an adventure book, not a source book. And it actually surprised me, to be perfectly honest. I didn't do a ton of research into Dragonlance before it came out. I wanted to look at the book itself without listening to everyone else's opinion about what's good and bad about it before it even came out. And let me tell you, after reading the book, I did start looking out and seeing the various takes that people had on it coming up to the release. I've not read anyone else's review of it, but I did read a bunch of previews about it. And boy, did a lot of people get a lot of things wrong that they bitched about incessantly. So anyway, as far as players, adventure books generally are not written for players. And that doesn't mean that a player can't get anything out of an adventure book, but players are not the target audience, so they're generally going to get less of a benefit. They're going to get less of a benefit from an adventure book than, let's say, a Dungeon Master. That being said, because this is introducing a brand new campaign setting to 5th edition, there are a few player options that are included in here. The Kender race is in here. When I do the in-depth review of Chapter 1, we'll talk about the Kender race itself and why there's one aspect of the Kender race that doesn't show up anywhere in this book, and I am super, super happy because nobody plays it right at all. So if you're interested in finding out what that is, watch that chapter. They also have 2 new backgrounds and a few new feats that are not only are they specifically designed for this adventure, their prerequisite is you have to be playing in a Dragonlance campaign. You're not allowed to use these in the Forgotten Realms. Does that mean a DM can't override that and let you use them anyway? Absolutely not. But I do find it interesting that the backgrounds and feats and everything in this book are even more so than like the Strixhaven, which I had a large problem with the Strixhaven backgrounds because they were just more powerful than any other background in the game. And so even if you were playing a Strixhaven game, it almost forced you to take a background from that as opposed to literally any other background that exists in D&D 5th edition. And I don't like that. That's not good game design. That's bad game design. Good game design gives you choices. Bad game design gives you right answers. This one does it so much better than Strixhaven or any other new introduction of backgrounds and feats and things like that that I've seen. So as far as player options, then they also include a new subclass for this as a sorcerer, which I will be doing a D&D deep dive on because I think it's cool. And I haven't done a D&D deep dive in forever since when D&D stuff started. So overall, after the introduction chapter, War Comes to Krynn, and Chapter 1, which is called Character Creation, there's really not a whole lot for players. Starting in Chapter 2, you actually get the adventure, and that goes all the way through Chapter 7. The first Appendix A, does have some new magic items, but in general, I don't tend to be a huge fan of letting players just kind of shop through the different magic items, because I think that creates a strong need to kind of min-max your character if you know that, oh, I can just get this and this and this, like the whole store of magic items, magic item mart. I'm not a big fan of that. I think it takes a lot of the cool aspects of magic items away from it when you can just go in and go, oh, I've got 50,000 gold, then I'm going to pick up this legendary magic item. No, it's not cool. So they are interesting, but I don't think that's particularly useful for players either. And then Appendix B is like their monster manual, and Appendix C is something I will talk about when we get there, but it's kind of cool. So, but none of those things are really useful for players. For the most part, as a player, if you are buying this book, the big benefits to you are going to be the new race option, the new backgrounds and the new feats and then the new sorcerer subclass, which is good. Don't get me wrong. However, the digital version of this is $30 basically, and to get the physical version, which I'm actually going to look. I believe the physical version. I'm actually not sure what the physical version. Right now, they have a deal that you can get both the physical and digital versions combined for $60. That's excuse me. That's the version that I purchased because buying the physical digital bundle gets you early access, which is why I have the entire book to review right now. Without buying the physical digital bundle, if you just buy the digital bundle, it's $30 and it doesn't unlock until December 6th. So for the price right now, if you wanted access and you wanted to build a character right now, the price for a player is $60. And $60, I believe, includes free shipping in the U.S. And a few other countries, but because I live in the U.S., that's the one that I'm most familiar with. So it does come with free shipping depending on where you live. So $60 is the price, $60 plus tax. Do I think this is worth $60 to a player? Absolutely not. The physical book itself does come with a poster map, which I think will be really cool. I've seen the digital version of it. It's very, very pretty. I'm a big fan of maps in general, especially for players. I know you would think like maps would be kind of a DM thing because then you can plan out how everything goes. Maps are so useful to players. They really, really are. It helps you to really put yourself in the world when you can see, oh, this is where my character grew up, and this is where I lived, and these are the various places I might have gone to, these are the places I've heard of. Like, maps are really important. Do I think that justifies $60 right now for basically, I think there's half a dozen feats, 2 backgrounds, and a single subclass? Not really. Do I recommend it at the $30 price point? I think with the additional lore and stuff like that, especially if you are not familiar with Dragonlance and the world of Krynn, I think it's worth it for players to buy the digital version. But again, the digital version doesn't exist right now, or the digital only version doesn't exist right now. You cannot purchase that, or you can purchase it right now. You will not be able to look at it until December 6th, in about 2 weeks. So yeah, I would say for players, my recommendation, hold off on this. If you have a DM that really, 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 really wants to run this adventure, have them buy the physical and digital version. Maybe have the whole table pull together to get it. And then pull together, get them a D&D Beyond Master subscription, have them start a campaign, and let them share their options with everyone. It's completely legal. It's how it's designed to work. And then none of the players have to shell out $60 for a few things that they might use to create a single character, maybe 2 or 3, since again, the amount of things that you can do in Dragonlance right now is really just this adventure. There's not really enough in this adventure to inspire too many other adventures in Krynn. You're going to have to go outside, possibly buying the old 3rd edition books, because whether or not the mechanics work from 3rd edition, all the lore still exists. And you can use that to plan more adventures and things like that, despite the fact that there are some inconsistencies between the editions, which we'll talk about during the in-depth portion of the review. So, yes. So for players, is this a recommendation? I cannot recommend the physical digital bundle for players. The physical version, I don't know how much it cost. If I had to take a guess, here, I'm going to look up, because I wasn't smart enough to look up what the actual cost of just the book. Here we go. Find, so yeah, it looks like it's, at least on On Amazon, the list price is $49.95, so $50 for the physical book, $30 for the digital, $60 for the combination physical digital bundle. So yeah, I think the digital version is worth it. The additional stuff that you get, the lore and things like that, if you want to create a character that is based in Krynn or maybe came from Krynn and went to another world, like maybe found a way to the Forgotten Realms or something like that, I think $30 is worth it. $50 for the options that you have here, I don't think it's worth it, and definitely not this. This is $60 right now. There's just not enough here for players to really recommend that. And if you aren't interested in actually playing a character from the world of Krynn and you just want the options, D&D Beyond generally sells character options individually for a couple of bucks. If all you're looking for is like the feats or the backgrounds or something like that, you are probably significantly better off just buying them piecemeal at like $2 or $3 a piece. So yes, as my recommendation to players. Moving on. The next group. Should DMs buy this? First things first, with this being an adventure book, again, this is tailored towards DMs. However, this has got to be one of the most interesting adventure books I've seen them publish. And the reason behind that is, and I wanted to make mention of this, there are two different physical digital bundles you can get. And I didn't specifically mention what's called the deluxe edition bundle during the players, because again, it's just more stuff that the players don't need. What the deluxe edition bundle is it includes the physical and the digital versions of the books, but it also it includes a special foil cover version of the book. So you get a special version of the book, which is cool, but it also comes with a Dungeon Master screen and a board game called Warriors of Krynn, which their little spiel that they say about it: Warriors of Krynn, a cooperative mass battle game pitting the heroes and their allies against the fearsome dragon army, designed by Rob DeVoe and Stephen Baker. So, why does that matter? Well, in certain parts of this adventure, if you're not familiar with what's called the War of the Lance is, it is a huge pivotal moment in Dragonlance. It is the most popular period of time in Dragonlance kind of lore. Most of the novels are set during the War of the Lance, and most of the novels, my understanding, is revolve around a single party of adventurers. Which has been one of the kind of criticisms about Dragonlance, is that Dragonlance, while yes, it is, an entire campaign setting, is an entire campaign setting that revolves around a single party of adventurers, which is much different from something like the Forgotten Realms, which has Elminster and Drizzt, and there are so many different groups of adventurers that canon exist in lore. The Baldur's Gate games exist in lore and are canon. So the world itself does not revolve around Drizzt, doesn't revolve around Elminster, or any of the Companions of the Hall, or any of the other kind of one-shot books that have shown up as far as Forgotten Realms books are concerned. Dragonlance itself heavily revolves around this one group of adventures. Most of the books are about them. The War of the Lance, they were a real big part of it, but it is literally that. It is a very large war that happens on the world of Krynn. And because of that, there are many big battles. And this adventure retells a part of the War of the Lance. that, to my knowledge, hasn't been told before. The main adventuring party that all the books are about, they're doing other things while this is going on. And this isn't at this particular part of the War of the Lance, is not at the very beginning. The War of the Lance has been going on for a little bit of time before this adventure starts. So why do I keep talking about this? Well, in every chapter, there are sections where it says, if you have the board game Warriors of Krynn, you can skip this next part and play this situation, or this scenario, in Warriors of Krynn, and have the players play this, and you play as these characters. And so this adventure actively has you switching between kind of your standard RPG, tabletop RPG role-playing, and then every so often you get to play a board game that has impact on the story. And it's really interesting and cool. And it's the first time I've ever seen a published adventure that actually puts in effectively what I would call a mini game. If you have been playing RPGs, like video game RPGs, for any amount of time, something that is really, really common, just in general, and I think the one that I remember it first being a really, really big deal was Final Fantasy VII way back in the 90s. These things called mini games, where it's a game within the game, and sometimes doing well in it has some impact on the story. Sometimes it's entirely a side mission. But since then, most RPGs have some sort of minigame thrown in somewhere. And some are more fun than others. But it's kind of a commonly accepted trope in an RPG that every so often you're going to have a game where the gameplay, or a part of the game where the gameplay completely changes. And you have to do something very, very different from what you've been doing for the entire game. And that's exactly what this does. You stop playing a tabletop RPG and you get to play, from what it looks like, a pretty well-designed board game. Now, I haven't seen the board game. I did not spend the $155 to get the deluxe edition, because there's no way I will ever have that much money that I can just spend on a single D&D book for a review. I'm not going to get a chance to play the board game because I'm agoraphobic and I can't, leave or anything like that. And I have no friends that live anywhere near me. So the board game would be kind of useless for me, other than it'd be really cool to have. But I do love the fact that part of the game, if you do have the money to get this deluxe version, you get that board game with it, in every chapter you get a chance to go, okay guys, now we're going to interact. We're going to use this to create a kind of mass battle. Instead of it just being your 5 characters against a few other guys, we're going to see an actual outright battle as a part of a war. And I think one of the coolest things about this is whether or not you want to play this. And again, I have not seen the rules. I've just seen the little descriptions of the scenarios, which isn't even full description of the scenarios. It says play this scenario. The scenarios already exist in the board game. And the board game itself is not like, Risk, where it's just like, well, here's the rules and go ahead and start somewhere. It's much more akin to something like Betrayal at the House on the Haunted Hill, where when you start the adventure up, you will pick a scenario, and then that tells you how to set up the board and things like that. So there's going to be a lot of replayability. I'm a big fan of games like that. But again, even if you are not a fan of Krynn, you are not a fan of Dragonlance in general, you don't like running pre-written adventures, all of those are completely valid things. There is still a benefit to seeing and reading, and for this particular one, because it's such a different thing, I really, really think there's a big benefit in actually running at least chapter 2, the chapter is called Prelude to War, but it's basically the intro chapter, because at the end of the intro chapter, it does allow you say, by the way, go ahead and try this particular adventure, just so the people who get used to how the game plays. This scenario in Wars of Krynn. But I think just simply running something and getting an idea about how to incorporate a completely different gameplay style into this can be really, really interesting and fun. I love D&D. I love RPGs in general. I have been running multiple campaigns for the better part of a decade. I think I'm going on at least 9 years now that I've been running multiple campaigns simultaneously, in addition to running, games at conventions and at friendly local game stores. Like, I play a ton of D&D. Mostly I DM, but way back when I used to be allowed to play as well. So I'm not saying tabletop RPGs or D&D are boring, or that you can't play them over and over and over again and things. They're super, super fun. And I love playing them. And I probably always will. But being able for like a single session or two to go, okay, we're going to do something very, very different, but it still has an impact on the story. Like, this is going to decide how the rest of the, the next part of the story goes. I think that is really, really ingenious, because anyone can get burnout. Doesn't matter if you are the greatest dungeon master in the world, or the most phenomenal player in the world, or your group is perfect and never does anything wrong. Eventually you can get burnout. And by just changing things up every so often, it reduces burnout, and it will reinvigorate your players and yourself. The reason last year for Daily December I stopped running my normal campaigns and I just tried 4 different RPG systems was I was starting to feel a little bit of burnout, and so I needed something to kind of reinvigorate my love of storytelling and creating and things like that. And it did exactly that. It also found me a new player for one of my campaigns, which was super, super cool and fun. And I'll be doing something similar again this year. Check me out on twitch.tv/TrainerJody Wednesday at 9 p.m. Central Time for an announcement on what's happening this year. But I think that's really, really interesting. The adventure itself is fine. There's nothing wrong with the adventure. I will say the dialogue in this adventure so much better than the dialogue, the just absolute shit that they have been putting into their books up until now. Whoever wrote the dialogue in this is significantly better. But again, just saying that is kind of like going, well, it's better than dying a slow and painful death. Like, they were real bad, and this one is, I wouldn't say it's phenomenal dialogue or anything, but it works really well. And I can't say that about the past few books. So, but overall, the adventure itself, it's interesting. It tells a compelling story. It ties itself very, very well into the world of Krynn. It does some very interesting, unique things that I haven't seen them try to before. And as far as I can tell, again, I haven't run the adventure, so I can't say 100% this is true. But from what I've read, it looks like they did it pretty well. Everything in here, from my understanding of how to run a D&D game, everything in here looks like it should work pretty well. And it should be really fun for the players, depending on how they react to it. So overall, I think it's a good adventure. And if you don't get the board game, you or like me, you play online and there's no possible way you could have, thank you, phone, and there's no possible way that you could have people play it. Every single time where it says, by the way, play this scenario in Warriors of Krynn, it also says, if you're not playing it, here's an adventure or run this part of the adventure. If you are using Warriors of Krynn, you can skip this part of the chapter. So they do have a tabletop RPG version of the events. It's just on a much smaller scale. Again, Warriors of Krynn is a battle simulator, a mass battle simulator, whereas a tabletop RPG is going to be a single party against a single group of enemies. So it's not like you can't play this adventure without it. You 100% can. It works perfectly fine. I just really like the fact that they have effectively found a way to insert mini games, and it looks really, really fun. And the other thing that's nice about it, because every single time you get one of those prompts, they go, by the way, if you're not going to use this, here is a thing that you can play in just D&D and not have to use it at all. That means if in Chapter 3 they run it and they really, really like it, but when they get to Chapter 4 and you do the next Warriors of Krynn, they're kind of over it. When you get to Chapter 5, you can just go, okay, you guys don't want to play it anymore. We're just going to do the regular thing. And then get to Chapter 6. Oh, you guys want to play it again? You know, it can be every single time. You can make the choice of, do you guys want to play the board game? Or do you want to just remain playing your characters? And they do have suggestions in here on how to... in here, and apparently in the board game as well. Again, I don't have it, so I don't know. On how to kind of incorporate their player characters into the board game. I have no idea how that works. Again, I don't have the board game. I have no idea how it plays. I don't know if it's just like, well, have them use this character and we'll just call them their character name. Or if there's actually more complex rules. I got no idea. But I do like that aspect of it. And again, even if you're not going to run this, even if you don't want to use Warriors of Krynn, this could be used again to template to be able to put things in. Like if you want to have an adventure where eventually your party is kind of commanding an army in like a country to country war, by reading this and kind of figuring out how they balance the idea of the board game introducing this, you could use your own board game as kind of like a side thing that they can do every so often. And you could use whatever one, like if you wanted to use Small World, which I have there. That's Small World. Which is super fun, kind of like Risk, a board game, but a lot more interesting and fun and silly. You could do that. And you could have a lot of fun doing it. And again, that little change up for like a session or two can be reinvigorating for your players. So anyway, going back, do I recommend DMs buy this? Hell yes. I recommend getting the physical digital bundle, because for $10 more, having a digital version is really, really useful. If for nothing else, then that you can get the maps that you're supposed to... They actually have battle maps and things in the adventure. And when you have the digital version, you can literally just copy them, save them to file, and then print them out on your own if you want a physical version of it. Or if you run online like I do, I can literally just save it to file and then upload it to Roll20 or whatever virtual tabletop I want. And we can just use the map right there. It's super easy and simple. So for that mere fact alone, even if you don't do digital stuff, even if you always run at a physical table, I would recommend DMs definitely pick up the physical digital bundle. The additional $10 is definitely worth it for all the maps and everything, and just having a digital copy is really, really nice. You can pick it up on your phone, you can pick it up on your tablet, stuff like that, and read the entire adventure in there. It's really good. With the deluxe version, I have no idea how expensive Warriors of Krynn is. I'm gonna see if I can find just the thing itself. So yeah, it's looking like I found it on Miniature Market. It's looking like it's going to be running around, at least on Miniature Market, it's running about $64. So in the $60 to $65 range, meaning with the deluxe bundle, to get the whole deluxe edition bundle, you're going to be paying about, if we go 120, you're going to be paying about $30 more to get you early access, because that's part of all the bundles. But basically the 30 extra bucks is basically the deluxe edition book, which has the special foil cover for Shadow of the Dragon Queen, and you also get a Dungeon Master screen, which Dungeon Master screens are really useful and fun. I always loved using Dungeon Master screens. I think I still have my Murder in Baldur's Gate Dungeon Master screen that I got from a friend who actually bought the module, and it's a cheap plastic screen, but it works, and it's got the map of Baldur's Gate on it. It's super cool. And I think I have a few other DM screens around. They're useful tools in general. So yeah, do I recommend getting the entire Shadow of the Dragon Queen Deluxe Edition bundle? It's a tough sell for me. Again, I think the book is amazing. The actual board game looks like it's going to be fun, but I can't really give you an opinion on it because I've never seen it. Doesn't exist right now. But paying $155 for it, I think, is a little bit rough. Not to mention the fact that once the board game itself gets on things like Amazon and stuff like that, there's a good chance you're going to be able to get it for $10 to $20 off. And yeah, like I said, I think running this adventure with the board game is probably going to be the most fun version of this to play. Yeah. So, going back to my recommendations, do I recommend this for DMs? Yes, I recommend the digital physical bundle. If you want to just get the book for $10 less, go for it. It's definitely worth it. And if you're only interested in the digital version, again, definitely worth it. I recommend all the way up to the digital physical bundle. Anything beyond that, the deluxe edition or the board game itself, that's up to you if you want to invest in that. The board game itself is going to have more for you to do than just use it in this adventure. It's a board game. You can play it anytime with any group of people, whether or not they like D&D. So there's benefits and drawbacks to it, but this is a D&D book review, so I'm going to focus on that. Moving on. The final group, Lore Hounds. Because this is the introduction to the world of Krynn and Dragonlance in general, this has a decent amount of lore in it. The intro chapter, War Comes to Krynn, not only does it give you a pretty good basis of, the world itself, but it does give a brief history of the world of Krynn, which is really interesting and fun. And I actually read through most of it. I didn't read through absolutely everything, but I read through most of it, and it's a decent size read. Chapter 1, the character creation, also has a ton of lore in there as well. And then each one of the adventure chapters, again, not only are the adventure chapters written, which has become relatively common with 5th edition adventure source books, or adventure books, I mean. It is something that you can read from beginning to end and get a pretty good idea of an interesting story. Because there aren't players involved, you basically get to see a bunch of what ifs, because you find out what happens when they succeed and they fail. So it's not going to be anywhere near as fun as actually playing it, but there's a lot of lore here that you get. And then in every chapter, they tend to have a section in the beginning that describes the area that they're in. Like chapter 3 takes place in a city called Vogler, and The third part in that chapter is called the Vogler Gazetteer, which is just lore about the city that you can use when you're playing it. And almost every chapter has something like that. If you enter a new city, they will have a gazetteer for that city. Sometimes it's just a different area, and so they'll have extra lore on maybe one of the characters you're going to deal with there. Every time they introduce a new NPC, they give a pretty decent-sized backstory to the NPC. So overall, there is a lot of lore here. However, Dragonlance as a series is remarkably vast for how few books exist about it compared to something like Forgotten Realms. And because of that, compared to the just vast amount of information out there about Dragonlance and Krynn, this is a relatively small part of the lore. So for lore hounds picking this up, more likely than not, I'm not saying it's not a good purchase. I'm saying be prepared that if this is something that interests you, you are going to want to look for more Dragonlance books. The lore itself is really interesting, and the world itself is a very unique style world. Just because it doesn't fit into a lot of the kind of common fantasy tropes. It tries to turn a lot of tropes on their head and create some interesting dichotomies into the things like that, and it turns into something really interesting and fun. So my recommendation for lore hounds: is this worth picking up? I would say the digital version, definitely. $30, I can more than justify picking this up. Moving up to $50, again, the physical map is a huge selling point for me, especially for lore hounds. It's nice to have a map. Again, I have my map on the wall here, and that is Tal'Dorei from the new Tal'Dorei book. I love it. So I could definitely see recommending, I definitely would recommend, if you like physical things, pick up the physical book at $50. I think that's perfectly fine. The physical digital bundle, unless you are really hardcore, you want to read it today and you're not willing to wait 2 weeks, the only real benefit for lorehounds for the physical digital bundle is going to be the fact that they don't need to keep their heavy book with them to read the lore. They can read all the lore on their phone. That would be the only benefit, and you get the same benefit if you just buy the digital version. So I'd probably say, unless you want the early access, I probably wouldn't recommend the digital physical for lorehounds, just because there's just not as much that's useful here compared to something like a DM who's going to use everything in this book, whereas lorehounds are going to have to kind of pick and choose the things that they want, because a lot of the book is like monster stat blocks and, you know, mechanics for how to run encounters and things like that, which for a lorehound is just not that useful. Some of it's really interesting. Seeing how the lore turns into mechanics can be really interesting to some lorehounds, but for the most part, you're not going to get the full use out of this book. So going with the physical digital bundle, I'm probably going to say no. And the deluxe edition, unless you want the board game, the deluxe edition, definitely not. So overall, players, I recommend the digital only for the most part. There's enough lore and stuff here that can help you create interesting characters for Krynn. I do not recommend the physical or the physical digital bundle. It's just too expensive for the very limited amount of stuff. And if you're only looking for the character options, buy them piecemeal when they come out on D&D Beyond, because you'll save yourself like $20. For DMs, I highly recommend the physical digital bundle. Anything below that is recommended. The deluxe edition bundle, if you've got the money and you like, you know, pretty things, it's probably worth it. But if you just want to run the adventure with the board game as well, the board game's about $65. Save yourself $30 and just buy the physical digital bundle and the board game separately. And then for lorehounds, just the digital version is the only one I can recommend. The physical version, if you really want the map, but even then, $50 for the amount of lore that you get in here is going to be pushing it a little bit for me, and definitely not the digital physical bundle. So that is my recommendations for this. If you were just here for the recommendations, thank you so much for watching. Again, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on, all things super important, and in the comments down below. Let me know if you know what the Kender are. Let me know your prediction about what aspect of the Kender didn't make it into the book that I'm really happy about. Otherwise, just let me know what is your favorite kind of genre-specific version of a race. Like Vulcans are effectively space elves. Or the Kender are the halflings of Dragonlance. Halflings don't exist. Their Kender is their version of halflings. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, it's time for us to get into the in-depth review. As a quick reminder, the in-depth review is exactly that, in-depth. I am going to go through chapter by chapter. I'm going to talk about the things I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think they did well, the things that I think they need to fix. I'm going to have chapters in my video, so if you don't want to spend, this is probably going to be another 2-hour video at least. If you don't want to spend 2 hours in one sitting listening to all this, you can come back and just watch it chapter by chapter if you want. I know for a fact that's bad for the YouTube algorithm, but I think it is what is best for my audience, because I wouldn't want to listen to me talk for 2 hours. And I am me, and I like the sound of my own voice. I sincerely doubt you all want to listen to me talk for 2 hours. That being said, I think it's time we start by looking at the first chapter. So, the first chapter, War Comes to Krynn. This is your standard intro chapter to an adventure book. It has a bunch of lore to kind of get you into the world. Because this is the introduction of Dragonlance to 5th edition, this has a lot more lore than, say, something like Out of the Abyss or Storm King's Thunder is going to have. Because those all happen in the Forgotten Realms. Because everything has already been happening in the Forgotten Realms, and they've introduced the Forgotten Realms, and the Forgotten Realms is in the PHB and the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual. They don't need to introduce a brand new world. This they do. And so they have this really kind of nice mixture of kind of in-universe explanations where you have notes and letters from various characters from Dragonlance talking about it, and then you also have kind of just narration around that. And one thing I sincerely appreciate is the handwritten notes look handwritten, or at least look as handwritten as you're going to get from a computer written note. But because of that, for some people, it's difficult to read. Me specifically, I have really, really bad double vision. And because of that, reading text in general can be really, really difficult, especially if it's black text on a white background. A lot of times I can't read that because the lines merge, and so it looks like words have been printed over each other and I can't read it. Whenever I start seeing things that looks like handwriting, it can become very difficult for me to read because the double vision will make L's look like C's and things like that. So next to every handwritten note, they have it in a more kind of neutral, easy to read font. And the background is always like a parchment color, not pure white, which is very, very nice. So I like that. They have a section called Using This Book. Now, this section, everyone, it just kind of tells you, you know, if you're going to be running the adventure from this book, this is how everything works. And then they have the history of Krynn. I gotta say, the artwork in this book is phenomenal. Wizard of the Coast, at least for 5th edition, has been knocking it out of the park with artwork. The artists that they hire to do this stuff are phenomenal, and they create some really, really impressive, amazing stuff that has not stopped. The artwork here is really, really great and interesting. The History of Krynn section gives a lot of stuff that you're going to need to know if you want to run something in Krynn. And one of the biggest complaints that I saw coming up to this was people were pissed off about clerics existing in Krynn. Slight spoiler alert. This has nothing to do with the adventure or anything, but if you're not familiar with the world of Krynn, there is a period of time called the Cataclysm in Krynn. And basically what it was there was this country called Istar. Istar was ruled by this group of people called the King Priests, who were basically dictating to the gods how they were supposed to god. These guys, these people were the Karens of Krynn. And so they asked to speak to a manager and said, if you don't answer every prayer that I told you to answer the way that I want you to, well, we are just going to become gods ourselves. And we will do what you guys refuse to do. Do you not know who I am? I am a loyal customer that writes your paycheck, and so you must do what I say. 100% that's what these people are. And so the gods got pissed because the King Priests are effectively trying to usurp them and are doing things that are really, really bad. And so they sent what's called the 13 Warnings, which is they sent a bunch of signs like trees crying blood, trying to convince these guys, hey, maybe it's not a good idea for you to do this. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to break the world. They didn't listen. So what the gods decided to do is they took all of the clerics, all the paladins, all of the divine-oriented people that were listening to the gods, and they went, shoop! They took them all away, and then they, quote, threw a fiery mountain at the nation of Istar and turned it, the little description, a mountain of fire fell from the sky, destroying Istar. The Blood Sea, a new ocean that split eastern Ansalon, consumed the empire. They wiped them off the map and rearranged the planet. This is hundreds of years before the adventure takes place. Because of that, they literally took away all divine casters in the world, disappeared instantly, and the gods left. And that's the big thing. Divine magic doesn't exist in Krynn, or at least that's what everyone talks about, and everyone says, well, that's the unique thing about Krynn and Dragonlance is there's no clerics, there's no divine magic, and so because of that, you can't get resurrections and stuff like that. That's not true, by the way. The first Dragonlance book, one of the characters that for the life of me I can't remember her name now. One of the characters worships the gods that don't exist anymore, and her kind of plot in that book is she eventually becomes the first true cleric in a few hundred years as the gods start coming back to the world, because Takissis, who is effectively the Krynn version of Tiamat, basically the evil dragon god. Takissis is a god. She's an evil god, but she's a god, and the War of the Lance is her coming back to the world. And so the entire plot of the War of the Lance, which is what you guys are dealing with, is the gods are coming back after being gone for something like 300 years. So the idea that, well, divine magic doesn't exist on the world of Krynn technically is true for about 300 years. However, the books, all the time where people have been playing in the world of Krynn, and they've done stuff after the War of the Lance as well, all of that stuff happens after the gods start coming back. So the idea that, well, they've just thrown out everything from, like, all these people are getting mad, well, clerics shouldn't be allowed to exist in Krynn. That's not how you play the game, and Wizards of the Coast that's ruining Dragonlance. No, it hasn't been true since the first books came out in the 80s. Divine magic has always been a part of Krynn. Again, major plot of one of the first books in the series was divine magic returning. Divine magic has had a huge, huge part in it. And the first chapter, which we'll talk about when we get to the first adventure part, chapter 2 actually, one of the little mini adventures you can go on specifically deals with the fact that divine magic is returning, and is specifically stated, if you have divine players in your party, you should run this mini adventure to explain how there can be divine players. It all in universe works perfectly. I literally read a pre-review where they talked about how, well, it doesn't make sense for divine people to, because they acknowledge that, I wish I could remember the name. If anyone remembers the name of the cleric character from the Dragonlance books, it's a woman. She has silvery gold hair. I can see an image of her. I cannot remember her name because I'm really bad with names. But put that in comments down below. They acknowledge, it's like, well, yes, she did, discover the discs that, talk about the good gods. But that doesn't happen until well into the War of the Lance. And this takes place before the adventure starts, before the War of the Lance even begins. Completely false. And this chapter talks about, there's a part that says the War of the Lance. And it actually talks about the fact that the War of the Lance, by the time the adventure starts, the War of the Lance have been going on for, let's see, War of the Lance starts effectively in what it looks like is 348 AC, which is after Cataclysm, is what that means. So 348 AC is when the War of the Lance officially starts. The adventure doesn't start, this particular adventure doesn't start until after 351 AC. So the war has been going on for 3 years at this point. And the big aspect of the war is the gods are coming back. That's what spurred the war itself, is the fact that the gods are returning to Krynn. Specifically one god, the version of Tiamat, and I hate trying to pronounce her name. Takissis is coming back, and because Takissis is coming back, the good gods are like, guys, we really, how we kind of just wrote them off because they were a bunch of Karens doing asshole shit? Well, Takissis is going back, and she's probably going to fuck things up. So maybe we should just go and try and make her not as bad as possible. The other thing that they mention in here, and I've, in the rest of my research where I started, I wanted to learn about the world before the 5th edition book existed. Divine magic wasn't gone. The evil gods still exist. It was the good ones that pieced out. So evil clerics and evil paladins and things like that still existed. They were exceedingly rare because due to their evil nature, there was a lot of infighting and stuff like that. So they were super, super rare, but they still existed. So this idea that divine magic doesn't exist on Krynn has never been true. And yet a lot of people just accept it as fact because the good gods and the neutral gods did take a step back after Istar fucked up massively. And they took all of the good aligned divine casters with them. So in a way, yes, divine magic was incredibly limited for 300 years. Nobody plays in those 300 years. Everyone plays during the War of the Lance or after the War of the Lance. It's always how it's been. Divine magic's always been a thing. Anyone that's saying is, well, they're ruining Krynn because they're allowing divine magic. It's not true. It has never been true. It is a bunch of gatekeepers trying to prove the kind of people that are saying, well, divine magic doesn't exist in Krynn, are the same people that go, well, dual wielding historically has never been a thing. It was never true. The historical weapons experts, or the historical combat experts that claim that dual wielding was never a thing, are simply trying to be contrarians to make themselves look good. We have tons and tons of proof that dual wielding was a thing that happened in various cultures, including European cultures. Dual wielding was a thing in Europe. It was also a thing in China. It was a thing in Japan. It is not an uncommon fighting or it is not an extremely rare fighting style. It is an uncommon fighting style because it takes a significant amount more training to be able to be good at it and to be useful with it. Same thing is true as here. Divine magic has always existed in Krynn. Even during the 300 years post-Cataclysm, divine magic existed. There were divine spellcasters on Krynn in that 300-year time period. They just were almost exclusively evil. And all of the books deal with divine magic. All of the adventures deal with divine magic. The whole purpose of the War of the Lance is the gods are coming back. That's the whole plot. Anyway, the rest of this, and it talks about the Cataclysm. It's a really cool description of the Cataclysm and the all the other stuff. Like, there's really, really cool stuff in here. The lore is really, really interesting. And I think, like I said, I think one of the most interesting things about this is it does give a bit of a play-by-play of the War of the Lance before the adventure starts. So it talks about the various steps that have happened over the past few years of the War of the Lance going on. Because despite the fact that this large war is going on, the entire world is not embroiled in this war. There are lots of places that have not been touched by the war. And so because of that, your particular characters are going to be in a place that hasn't been touched by the war yet. Doesn't mean the war isn't happening. It doesn't mean that all the other stuff like divine magic starting to show its face again. Doesn't mean that that stuff isn't happening. It means you guys haven't experienced it yet. And that's what the adventure is about, which I find really cool and interesting. And then they have a section called Life on Ansalon. Ansalon is, I believe it's the continent that all this stuff is set on. And again, useful stuff for lore building and the things like that. And then one of the final sections, they have Rumors of War, which is another thing that I really, 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 really enjoy about more kind of nuanced RPG books. What I mean by that is Rumors of War, every player that plays in the game, you roll on a table, and each one of them knows a different rumor about the war that's going on. Because again, the area that you're in has not been touched by the war, but people know the war is going on. It's a world war. They're aware that the war is going on. It just hasn't gotten there yet. So every one of the characters has heard a rumor about the war. But not all the rumors are true. And so what happens is when you roll up your character and before you start, the DM rolls on this table for each character and tells each character a rumor, but doesn't tell the character if the rumor is true or not. And I really, really like that aspect because we see this in real life constantly. There are a lot of examples I could give right now, but because they are very, very, let's say, politically charged about the idea that a lot of people believe a lot of things that are 100% untrue, and have no idea that they are complete, bold-faced lies about so many different topics. I'm not going to give specific examples, but I will guarantee you, if you are watching this, you personally have heard somebody say something that they believe is 100% true, that is a bold-faced lie. I will guarantee you have heard it. And so I like the fact that they're kind of bringing that idea in. And I like the idea of an unreliable narrator for the players, because it's very easy for the players to get into this position of, you know, we're basically gods. If you're familiar with Critical Role Season 1 and the Goldfish incident, a lot of people will, or a lot of players will get to this thing that every time they learn something, they can write that down and then they can base their worldview about it. They never, because they can do things like roll insight checks and stuff like that, they have a significantly higher level of confidence in what they know being true or false than your regular person. Because again, not only can they roll insight checks, but they know how much they rolled. And so they can make the decision of, well, I only rolled a 2 on the insight check to check that particular phrase, so I'm not going to trust that phrase because I don't know it's true. But I rolled a 20 on this insight check, so that means that has to be true. In the real world, you cannot know absolute truths for the most part. There's certain things like math itself is not really interpretational until you start getting into imaginary numbers and things like that. But, you know, 1 + 1 always equals 2. So there are things like that that you can know are facts, but a lot of what you know has to be filtered through your own understanding and who you trust and who you don't. And so I like the fact that 100%, I think the majority of these, I think there's only a few that are actually true. The majority of the rumors are false. And so the players may go into a situation believing one of these rumors, and there's no way for them to know which ones are true and which ones are false. And because they tell you the what the truth is on each one of the false ones, you theoretically, even if a player is familiar, they see which number you roll, and so they think they can figure out which one is true or false, you can literally just switch the rumor to the true one, and the players will have no idea. I like that. I think that is a really good thing. And again, it forces the players to try and live more in their characters than in their character sheets. Because they don't know if something is true or false. They have to go, well, does my character believe this to be true? Would my character believe it's strong enough to make decisions based on it? Things like that. I think that's a really, really fun way to run a game. So, yeah. Then, again, they have more stuff about the particular region. And then they have an entire section on religion and the gods. Again, the whole idea of divine magic doesn't exist on Krynn has never been true. And they have an entire section talking about the gods. And again, because the major plot point of the War of the Lance is the gods are returning, I thought it was weird when I was first reading the book. So I'm like, well, this seems weird. Because again, I went into this, because I did my research after I read the book. I went into this believing the lie that divine magic doesn't exist on Krynn. And because someone that I trust, I think, I can't remember who it was, Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms ran a live play that I think finished. I stopped watching it because my brain wouldn't let me, like 4 episodes in, so I have to go and catch up and watch the other ones. But one of the characters is I believe is a Kender from Krynn, or at least is just from Krynn in general. She's I believe she's a cleric, or she's some divine magic user. And one of the players in character goes, wow, that's really, really interesting, because divine magic doesn't exist on Krynn. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. A planet where divine magic doesn't exist. That actually is really close to the world of Athos, which is the Dark Sun campaign setting. And the reason that divine magic doesn't exist on Athos is not that the gods went away. The gods are dead. and Athos is a post-apocalyptic world. There are no gods. They're all dead. So because of that, divine magic can't exist. Whereas on Krynn, divine magic, the reason it stopped working was all the divine magic users, good divine magic users and neutral divine magic users, instantly got taken away. So there's no one to teach divine magic anymore. And the gods took a step back. So they were no longer actively interfering in the world, as most pantheons do in Dungeons and Dragons in general. If you look at the Forgotten Realms, the gods can't help but interfere in literally everything. The Chosen themselves are just the gods going, really? Fine. You know what? If we're going to have these rules about how we're allowed to interfere and how we're not allowed to, I'm just going to give a portion of my power to someone on the mortal plane and let them do it. So I'm not doing it. The mortals are doing it. It's just a mortal with divine powers is all. There was an entire period called the Time of Troubles where the gods were forced into mortal bodies and had to walk the world. Like, the gods are always interfering everywhere. The world of Krynn, for 300 years, the gods went, you know what? We're going to take a step back. We're not going to interfere in the world. And that means divine magic didn't work as well. There was no one left to teach it. And a lot of the people in the world believe that divine magic didn't exist anymore. But again, it wasn't true. There were still clerics. There were still paladins. They just tended to be evil. There didn't tend to be a whole lot of them because infighting was a big thing for them. But they do have an entire section on the various different good aligned gods, the neutral aligned gods, and the evil aligned gods, which is nice. Each one only gets about a paragraph, so this is not something like if you got the Sword Coast Adventures guide forever ago now. That one had almost like half a page to a page for each one of the gods. This is not that. This is like a paragraph that gives, and in general, they'll show a holy symbol for it as well. So not as big, but again, because the main kind of subplot of this is the gods are coming back, it's an important thing to be able to talk about the religion and the gods, especially since, again, the past 300 years, religion hasn't been a really big thing because the gods stopped intervening in the world. Thank you, phone. So yeah, that is War Comes to Krynn. Moving on. Out of my ginger ale, so now I have my water. The next chapter, chapter 1, character creation. The first part about this, it's called Peoples of Krynn, and it basically says how it explains how the various races exist in this particular world. This is something that if you're creating your own campaign setting, this is a necessary thing to do. My campaign setting, I have a document that lists how all of the various races exist, and not all the races are on there because I wrote that document like 8 years ago when I was running a very specific campaign and I never expanded it. But I know where every single race exists, and whenever a new race is introduced, I come up with, okay, do I want that race to exist in my world? And if it does, where does it come from? Like a good example from my personal campaign setting of Mendacia. Warforged. Warforged are a race from Eberron that were created for the last great war in the Eberron campaign setting. In my campaign setting, they're actually natives to the elemental plane of fire. And the way that they came about is the elemental energies of the plane of fire eventually started manifesting sentience. And that's where the elementals in general are kind of born from, is just the immense amount of energy in the elemental planes would eventually start to manifest sentience. That's how all races in my world were formed. Eventually, these fire essences needed a way to interact with the world, because they were basically just beings of pure energy. And so interacting with the world in general, all they could do was burn and things. So they eventually started manifesting hard metallic shells. And that eventually evolved into the Warforged. And a lot of Warforged don't 100% know the entirety of their history of them just kind of manifesting from the ambient elemental energy of the plane. But that is what Warforged are, is they are fire elementals effectively in living armor. And because the armor is manifested from their very will to interact with the world, it is a part of them, just as the skin and bones for us is a part of them. So they cannot exist outside of their armor. So that is how the Warforged exist in my campaign setting. So if someone wants to play a Warforged, they have to come up with a reason why, you know, they exist. Unless the campaign is set in the elemental plane of fire, they have to come up with a way for, or both of us have to come up with a reason for how they're no longer on the elemental plane of fire, because that's where their people come from. So that's really important, and that's what they have here. You know, they have the dwarves, the elves, the gnomes, the humans, and then they talk about race options because they introduce a new race called the Kender. I have mentioned before in this review, I am not a huge fan of the Kender. Not because I have some sort of problem with Dragonlance itself or with short races. I love halflings, I love dwarves, I love gnomes. I think they're really, really cool. My favorite book of J.R.R. Tolkien's is actually The Hobbit, because it's a much better read than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Lord of the Rings trilogy feels padded out, especially book 2, because like half of book 2 is Frodo and Sam were walking, and then walking some more, and then you know what they did? They walked, and then they took a break from walking to walk some more, and then they were walking, and then while they were walking, they decided to do some walking and discovered there was more walking, and then some walking happened, and Smeagol complained. Like, that is half of the Two Towers, and it's the second half of the book. The first half of the book is the Battle of Helm's Deep, and it's really interesting and fun. The second half of the book is just walking. And unlike the movie, where they kind of interpose the two things, and it works really well, they don't. First half of the book, really cool battle. Second half of the book, Mr. Frodo, would you like to walk some more?
Smeagol doesn't like walking. Stupid fat hobbits. Always walking.
I hated it so much. And I made it to the Return of the King, and I got like 2 chapters into the Return of the King, and it was still talking about walking and stuff. I'm just like, fuck this shit, and I'm done. Anyway, so it's not that I have a problem with those races. I have a problem with a single aspect of the Kender that does not exist in the 5th edition version. So I am hesitant to talk about it here, but I need to vent. So the interesting thing about the Kender lore-wise, the Kender themselves are technically kind of all the races on Krynn are forged by the gods. And there was this period of time where one of the gods just got super forge happy and just started creating a bunch of crazy races. And one of the races that apparently he created kind of on accident, Rayorks, is the god of craft. They specifically said, during the mythical origins of Krynn, Rayorks, god of craft, indulged in an age of unfettered creation. Calm down. Yes, that's a Power Rangers thing. Because Power Rangers is awesome. I'm just going to read the whole thing to explain the Kender. Many people sprang up from his divine forge, but not all among them remained as the god created them. Altered by unbridled magic, a group of gnomes were transformed and given almost supernatural curiosity and fearlessness. These were the first Kender. So the idea of the Kender is they are fearless and they're hyper-curious. However, the thing that every single person in any game I have ever run, where they have asked, can I play as a Kender, or I want to effectively play as a Kender, was the Kender do not understand the idea of ownership. The reason behind that is the creator of Dragonlance wanted to create effectively a race of people that, or a culture of people, since we're not allowed to use the word race anymore. A culture of people that were effectively thieves, but they weren't bad. They liked the idea of, you know, an entire culture that's built around being able to get things and kind of stow them away and stuff like that. But they didn't just want this kind of chaotic evil, everyone stealing from everyone. So they came up with this idea that the Kender quite literally do not understand the idea of ownership. If they see something and they want it, they're just going to take it because no one else is using it at the time, and therefore there's no reason they shouldn't. In the same way that if you are walking in the forest and you see a stream and you're thirsty, you're not going to look around and try and figure out who owns the stream so you can buy some water from them. You're going to go over to the stream, you're going to take a drink. It's kind of how Kender are supposed to work, is this idea of ownership of an object just doesn't exist in their brain. The concept doesn't make sense to them. That's not how anyone plays Kender. The way people play Kender is massive kleptomaniacs that are never allowed to get in trouble for stealing because it's part of their culture. And I hate that, because in a real world where there is an entire culture of people that do not understand the idea of ownership, they would not be kleptomaniacs. Because the idea of, I like this, and so I'm going to keep it, you don't understand ownership. Keeping something and making it yours doesn't make sense to you. So just picking up anything that you see would never make sense. No, the only time you would pick something up is if there was a use for it. And as soon as somebody else mentioned, oh, I have a different use for that, you would give it to them because they had a better use for it than you did. You would not go around stealing everything that you saw because, well, Kender don't understand ownership. It was always, every single person that wanted to play a Kender just wanted to play a kleptomaniac and wanted to be able to say, well, you can't get mad at me, I'm a Kender. That's how Kenders are played. No, it's not how they're played. And so they didn't say that in here. There's nothing about them stealing everything in here. They're super curious and they're super fearless. And I love that. I think it's a really, really cool character. When I'm going to do a D&D deep dive where I talk about the Kender traits, and I'll probably mix that in with the feats just so I can, because there's not enough here for me to make an entire video on the Kender. But I like the racial features. I think they're really interesting. I think they're really, really fun. I think they have a lot of uses in the game that could be super, super interesting. But I'm so happy that they finally got rid of this idea of Kender don't understand ownership, because nobody ever played them that way. And I kid you not, I had, for a completely different system in a completely different setting, I had somebody that was applying to be a part of the table, and so we were. I was making a character with them, so that they could play it and they can get an idea about how the system was going to work. And they said, "Well, I basically want this to be a Kender," and I was not familiar with Kender at that point. So I said, "Okay, what's a Kender?" Oh, they're the halflings from Dragonlance, but they don't understand ownership, so they steal everything. Okay, it's kind of weird. And I did my own research on it, and I'm like, okay, I guess I kind of get the idea of the Kender. So you want to effectively play a version of the Kender. The Kender don't exist in this particular world. But if you want to be from some unknown culture that doesn't understand, I mean, this is just kind of, an intro, session 0 kind of session for us to play and kind of get to know each other, to see if you're going to be a good fit for the table. Sure, if that's what you want to play. And the rest of character creation was just met by nothing but trouble. Every time I made a suggestion, well, that's not how it works. I said, okay, well, how does it work? Well, it doesn't work like that. I said, well, again, we have to create a character that has motivations and things, because that's what I'm going to be doing during this session 0, during this effectively tryout game, is I want to see if you can play a character and make decisions based on their motivation. And I want to see your ability to create and inhabit a character. And right now, all we have is we have a character that steals everything and is feisty. That was the only two things that this person would say about their character. Was like they had to be feisty, and have a bad temper, and they had to be able to steal everything because they don't understand ownership. Like, those aren't motivations; those are actions. They're what you do. We need to figure out why you do them. Well, they don't understand ownership. Fantastic. Why don't they understand ownership? Do they have brain damage? Like, the idea of owning something, even if you have a culture that doesn't understand ownership, which, by the way, has never existed on the planet. As much as a lot of people claim, well, the reason that the U.S. settlers were able to take advantage of the Native Americans was the Native Americans had no idea of ownership. And so they didn't think you could own the land. And so when the settlers came and they said that they owned this, they thought they were crazy, and then they all got killed. This is never true. Native Americans 100% had an idea of ownership. They just didn't recognize land ownership. And it wasn't that they couldn't understand it. They didn't recognize it. They just thought it wasn't something that you could do. It's not that, oh, ownership is just, I don't know how this works. And guess what, folks? It took less than a generation for them to figure out how ownership worked. It was real quick. Now, it happened to coincide with a little bit of genocide, but the idea of an entire race or culture of people that are completely immune to the idea of ownership is nonsense. And again, if they completely do not understand the idea of ownership, they will not be kleptomaniacs, because there's no reason to take things that don't belong to you if you don't have a reason to use them. So yeah, I like the description of Kender here. I'm glad they got rid of that stupid they're kleptomaniacs thing. They do make a reference to Kender sometimes amass impressive collections of curiosities. Some might collect mundane knickknacks or relics for magical sites, while others might become professional thieves. So they do mention professional thieves. But they link that to their curiosity, not, we don't understand ownership. It's not a thing. Need to throw it away. And then after that, they talk about some organizations. They introduce some new backgrounds. Which, one other thing that the reason I think they do the backgrounds correctly in this, again, the backgrounds they introduce here give you a free feat. I'm not a fan of 5th edition backgrounds giving a free feat, because the old backgrounds, the PHB backgrounds, every background up until, I think it was Strixhaven, but it might have been the book before it, I can't remember, never gave you backgrounds. So that just makes these backgrounds significantly more powerful, because you get a free feat. Not true anymore. They have a section talking about bonus feats. Whatever background you choose for a character in Dragonlance, in a Dragonlance campaign, this is specific to Dragonlance, you gain bonus feats as detailed below. Characters involved in the War of the Lance or other conflicts on Krynn are changed by the dramatic experiences they face. So, first level bonus feat. If you pick Knight of Solamnia or Mage of Hysis Sorcery background, you gain the feat specified in that background. If the background you choose doesn't provide a feat, you gain a bonus feat of your choice from the following list. You get either skilled or tough. And I think that's really good, because giving a feat is generally going to be more powerful than a background feature. However, having a background feature in general is better than nothing. So if you were to allow any background that doesn't get to have a background, doesn't get a feat as their background feature, if you allow them to just take any background, any feat that they wanted, that would make old backgrounds significantly more powerful than new backgrounds, because not only do they get a background feature, they also get a feat. So by specifically allowing either the skilled feat or the tough feat, and the skilled feat, if you're not aware, you gain proficiency in any combination of 3 skills or tools of your choice. Very useful, but it's not game breaking. Tough, you get extra hit points. Both of them are useful feats, but they are not game changing feats in any way, shape, or form. So they're not going to make like the Knight of Solamnia background is not more powerful than the Charlatan background with its first level bonus feat, and the Charlatan background is not more powerful with a knight than the Knight of Solamnia. This is the first time I have seen them find a way to reconcile, okay, if you use new feats, you're automatically more powerful than old feats. This is a way to balance it, and they finally did it right, and I'm really, really, really happy about that. This is the first time I've seen it work. And then at fourth level, you get another bonus feat. And again, for those of you who don't know, again, Dark Sun is my favorite campaign setting. It was the first campaign setting of Dungeons & Dragons I was introduced to. I played Dark Sun Shadowlands for DOS before I saw any of the other gold box D&D games. Before I knew what Neverwinter was, before I knew what Baldur's Gate was. I played Dark Sun, I believe, before I played Final Fantasy. It was one of the earliest games I ever played, and I loved it. It was a really cool game. But Dark Sun is tough as shit. And in most campaign settings for Dark Sun, they will tell you flat out, you do not start level 1 characters in Dark Sun. Level 1 characters will die before the adventure begins. No, you always start at level 3 minimum, sometimes level 5. In 4th edition, there was actually, in the 4th edition character creator they used to have, there's actually a toggle for Dark Sun characters because you got extra abilities to deal with the fact that Dark Sun was just tough as shit. And you had to take a Dark Sun background, which gave you more special abilities and things like that. Like, it was a really, really, really tough system. And I mentioned that when I was talking about Strixhaven. If they wanted to say that, okay, just in Strixhaven, this campaign setting is so difficult, we're giving you extra stuff, I would be fine with that. That is literally what they're doing with this bonus feat section. They're specifically saying Dragonlance is a hell of a campaign setting. In order to exist here, you need a leg up. So here they are. And so if you take the Knight of Solamnia or the Mage of High Sorcery backgrounds, there are 3 mage feats and there are 3 knight feats. That you basically have to choose one of, or you can choose one of them here, and you cannot choose those feats if you didn't take one of those backgrounds. I am not a fan of feat trees. I hated them in 3rd edition. I didn't like them in 4th edition. Feat trees basically force you to make a single decision that decides multiple things for 3, 5, sometimes 10 levels later. And it's not fun. If I make a decision, I want it to be for that level, not, okay, I need to plan my character 10 levels ahead of time. That's not fun for me. This is a single feat tree where at first level, your background gives you a feat, and then at 4th level, you can get a bonus feat, and that bonus feat can tie into your background feat, effectively upgrading it in a certain way. I'm actually okay with that. Most of the feats that they have here, I think, are interesting and are fun. And then if you didn't take either of those, it actually has 4 different feats that you can choose. 3 of them are from the Player's Handbook. 1 of them is from this new book. Divinely Favored is from this new book. So overall, and that's it. 1st level, you get a bonus feat. 4th level, you get a bonus feat. Both of them are from a very, very curated list of feats that you can take. And they specifically mention it's because Dragonlance is a hell of an adventure. It's a, Krynn is a hell of a world. If you're going to survive here, you need a little bit of a leg up. I'm perfectly fine with that. I think this is the best that they have dealt with this idea that they want to make backgrounds more useful, and the way that they decided to make backgrounds more useful was to give them feats. Again, I don't agree with that decision. I think it was really stupid, but it's the way they're going, and 1D&D is continuing with that. So at this point, it's kind of pointless to argue with it. That's the way it's going. This is the first time I have seen it done well. Every other time it has been, well, fuck your old feats. We created new, better ones, and you better choose one of our better ones, or you're going to feel like an ass. So, yes, very, very happy about that. And then they actually list the feats in here, which, again, I'm going to D&D deep dive on the feats in that. Then there's a new sorcerer subclass. It's called the Lunar Sorcery subclass. There's going to be a D&D deep dive on that. It's cool. I like it. And that is the end of Chapter 1. Overall, I like it. I think it's cool. Moving on. Chapter 2. Prelude to War. This is the first chapter of the actual adventure. The players in this chapter are designed to be level 1. And this actually does something that the Adventurers League has been doing for years. I've mentioned this in a few other videos. Every season up until I think season 7 or 8, when I stopped playing. I have no idea if they still do this anymore. But back when I was still involved in the Adventures League, every single season, the first adventure released for the season, which was generally season-1. So the first season, it was DDEX 1-1, DDDX 2-1, 3-1, things like that. That adventure was designed for first-level players. And what it was not a full 4-hour adventure. It was 5 mini adventures that were designed to take about an hour to an hour and a half each. And it was designed so that you didn't actually play all of them. You would kind of pick and choose, and generally in a 4-hour session, which is what any D&D Adventures League, or at least at that point, what most D&D Adventures League adventures were designed for, was for a single 4-hour session. In a single 4-hour session, you would generally play 2 or 3 of them, and by the end of the session, you would be at least level 2. And so you wouldn't need to play the other ones, because you can now start playing some of the other tier 1 adventures to get you up to 3 and level 4, and then eventually get to the tier 2 content at level 5, which was the majority of Adventure League play was done in tier 2. So, Chapter 2, Prelude to War, is effectively 3 mini-adventures that each have a different theme. The Chapter 2, I mean, the first thing they go through, they go through the adventure flowchart, which is a really, really useful thing for DMs in general. It basically talks about the campaign itself, and basically, okay, so what level should your characters be in each different place, and what basically is going to happen. They have like a 2-sentence description of what happens in that particular chapter. It's useful. And then they go into a little bit more description about each chapter. They talk about the Dragon Queen's threat and the various, real big stuff that you're going to have to know running this. They introduce a thing called character connections. There's a character that one of the hooks for the players to get to Vogler, which is the city where Chapter 3 takes up a place in, is there's this character called Ispin Greenshield, who they encourage the players to have some sort of a relationship with him in some way. Ispin Greenshield was a teacher, trader, and adventurer. So there's a lot of different ways that they could have gotten to know him. He's recently died, and so they're having a memorial for him in Vogler. And so that is one of the hooks to get the characters to get to Vogler. So they do kind of encourage, whatever your backstory is, let's find a way to say, well, once you met this dude named Ispin. And I think that's really interesting. And again, having one of the most difficult things in the world for new DMs is coming up with a reason why the adventuring party needs to be together. And that whole idea of, well, you meet in a tavern, that's that's done specifically because it's an easy way to get a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and situations into the same place for an inciting incident to happen, for them to all react to at the same time, and hopefully the reaction is uniform enough that they decide to work together. That's why everyone starts in a tavern. This is another way that you can get a group of people together, is you can just basically have them all have a connection through a single person that they knew. Some of them will know him better than others, and that will form a bond. I cannot tell you how many people I've met where I'm going, wait a minute, you know, wow, that's really interesting. I know them too. I met them through this. Oh, and you become very quick friends because you have a mutual acquaintance, even if they're not there. So I find that kind of interesting and cool. And they do have, you know, suggestions on how the characters might have met Ispin. And then the very last part is what's called the Preludes. The Preludes are 3 different adventures. And each one has a theme. Slight spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about them here. The first one is called Broken Silence, and specifically it says, Broken Silence heralds the gods' return and provides participating characters with a better understanding of their relationship to the gods. So all those people that divine magic doesn't exist in Krynn, let them play the Broken Silence. It's also really important, if you have a divine spellcaster in your party, you should be playing Broken Silence. You do not have to choose one of these 3 things to run. You can run all 3 of them. You can run 2 of them. You can run only 1 of them. But each one has a different thing that they do. The second one is called Eye in the Sky. And Eye in the Sky sets participating characters on the path to becoming a member of the Mages of High Sorcery. If you are an arcane spellcaster, Eye in the Sky is really important because in Krynn, arcane spellcasting in general is highly regulated. And it's not like good, the good people are in control and they hunt the bad people. No. Evil mages, there's an entire society of evil aligned mages. They're called the Black Robes. They are just as legal and have just as much power as the Red Robes, which are the neutral aligned, and the White Robes, which are the good aligned arcane sorcerers, or the arcane users. So all 3 of those groups exist simultaneously, and they're all governed by the Mages of High Sorcery. They're all part of the same group. So it's not like are you a good witch or a bad witch? Nope. If you refuse to join the Mages of High Sorcery, you are considered a renegade. And a renegade wizard is hunted by everyone in the world. It is considered the duty of every member of the Mages of High Sorcery, whether you're good, neutral, or evil aligned, it is your duty to hunt and kill renegade wizards. So it doesn't matter what your alignment is, if you don't join the club, you can be killed on sight legally by literally anyone, but generally by any spellcaster. So Eye in the Sky is really important if you have arcane spellcasters because it gets them set on eventually somehow getting involved with the Mages of High Sorcery, because you're not allowed to be a spellcaster unless you belong to this group. And then the final prelude is called Scales of War, and Scales of War reveals the mysterious Draconians. Draconians are a plot point that I'm not going to reveal, but they're a major aspect of the War of the Lance, and they're some of the more interesting creatures that you deal with in the adventure. So probably what I would recommend, depending on the party makeup, if you have any divine spellcasters, I would probably start with Broken Silence. If you have any arcane spellcasters, I would probably start with Eye in the Sky. Do both if you have both, but then I would almost guarantee it's in everyone's best interest to do Scales of War, whether or not you've done Broken Silence or Eye in the Sky, just because it introduces a really important part of the rest of the plot. Yeah, they have a thing called Prelude Overlord. It talks specifically Broken Silence, vocal characters, clerics, druids, paladins, and other characters with God-given powers. Eye in the Sky is for sorcerers, warlock, wizards, and others seeking membership in the Mages of High Sorcery. And then Scales of War is any character. And then they also talk about Warriors of Krynn, and they say, hey, this would be a good time for you guys to play basically the scenario 0 in Warriors of Krynn to kind of teach the players, if you're going to be using Warriors of Krynn in the adventure, go ahead and run your first game now, because it's an intro adventure, or it's an intro scenario, and they'll get used to how the game runs, so that when it actually counts for the plot, they know what they're doing. And then they have some, advice on how to run the preludes themselves, and then the preludes themselves. All of them are interesting. All of them have cool stuff you get to deal with. Overall, it's a nice introductory chapter. But like I said, I think the thing that I enjoy the most is the preludes. I like that idea of these little mini adventures that you can choose to run depending on your party makeup, because it makes the players feel that much more special when the introduction to the adventure is tailored to them specifically. And that's a really, really important part of running a good intro adventure, is that the players should feel that they're special and a part of this, because they are. Adventures are special. While adventuring may be a really common the thing in the setting that you are in, there's a good chance by the end of their career as adventurers, they are going to be saving the country or the world, which is not a common thing. They're going to become basically superheroes. And so they need to feel special right from the beginning, and this does that really well. So, yeah, moving on. Chapter 3, When Home Burns. This is another one that I think is really, really interesting. The basic, spoiler alert, the basic plot of it is you arrive in Vogler right when like a festival is going on, and kind of the festival itself is called the Kingfisher Festival, which is a fishing festival, and there's a little fishing contest that you can do in here. And then the end of the festival ends in this thing called the Battle of High Hill, which is basically a reenactment of a battle from hundreds of years before that was fought by the founder of the city. And so you get to do a little bit of historical reenactment with wooden weapons and stuff like that. And the kind of hook that gets you into it is somebody goes, hey, I knew Ispin, your friend that you're here, that, you go through the funeral and everything like that. They go, it was his dying wish that, he really enjoyed being a part of this festival every year. Would you guys, one of Ispin's friends would go, would you guys mind being a part of the festival in his honor? If he was here, he would want to be a part of it. And since he can't be, I think it'd be only fitting, since you guys were obviously, acquaintances or friends of his, I think it'd just be fitting for you guys to kind of be a part of it in his name. And I think it's a really cool way to give a very easy hook for the players to go with. And it has things to do if the players don't want to play ball. There are other ways to get them involved in what's going to happen here. So this is not railroading or anything like that. The players can make their own decision. But whatever happens, the plot is going to continue ticking on. This is something that I tell new DMs all the time when they're going, well, what if the players don't want to interact with the story that I've written? They want to do something else. Let them. It's their story. Let them do whatever they want. However, simply because they don't interact with the story that you wrote doesn't mean that the story just doesn't exist until they're there. The world always exists, whether or not the players are interacting with it. One of my favorite examples, I don't even know if this is real, but it's a great example nonetheless. There was a party that the first kind of plot hook that was given to them was they were hired to go to a graveyard and stop a necromancer from raising a bunch of undead, because it was pissing people off. The players went, nah, I don't want to do that, because they're going to fight the GM and they're going to do what they want. And so they decided to start, I think they decided to start like a an inn or some kind of business, and they actually created. They ran this game for like a year or something like that, or even longer. They created this kind of trade empire. And then a year later, this lich comes by with a massive undead army, and it wipes out the city that they're in and all these other things. And the player's like, well, how the hell are we supposed to fight this guy? Like, you created this horrible, this is the dumbest Deus Ex Machina thing ever. You're a bad DM. He goes, nah, you guys had a chance to deal with this guy a year ago. Well, what do you mean? This is the necromancer that was raising, the skeletons. You guys decided not to stop him. Nobody stopped him. So what did he do? He kept raising more undead. He started learning more necromancy. He eventually became a lich. And by the time anyone tried to stop him, he was so powerful that they couldn't. And they just became a part of his army. So your decisions matter. Just because you're not interacting with the world, they're not an NPC that won't do something until you interact with them. The world goes on when the party is not interacting with it. And so whether or not the players decide that they want to be a part of this reenactment, the reenactment is going to happen, and there's an event at the reenactment that goes very, very badly. Whether the players are there for it or not doesn't matter. However, it's a hell of a lot more fun for them and for the DM if they're there in some capacity. So the adventure is written in such a way that it gives a lot of different ways that the players could feasibly be there when it happens. If they decide not to, that's perfectly fine. But this adventure is going to bend over backwards to give them a ton of different reasons why they might be there, including monetary incentives. So anyway, this first adventure, like I said, there's a fishing contest, which I really think is cool and fun. Again, I'm a fan of mini games and stuff like that from my experience in playing video game RPGs. And so these little side quests and stuff like that are very, very useful and actually very, very important in building camaraderie amongst the players themselves. I learned the hard way. If the only thing that ever happens to your party is every time they succeed, another bad thing happens that they have to deal with, they get burnt out and then they quit your game. One of my campaigns ended in a spectacular fashion, partially because they never got any downtime. Literally, as soon as they solved a problem, I would present a new problem in the same session that was even bigger, because I thought that's how it worked. And I never gave them time to kind of relax in their victory. So yeah, things like this, even though this is the first part of the adventure, it's important to have those little team building, relaxing kind of moments where the players just get to have, their characters get to have fun and the players get to have fun. Eventually what happens though is the reenactment happens. Most people are using wooden weapons like they're supposed to, but there's some people that are trying to do bad things. They use real weapons, and it changes very quickly from a historical reenactment to, oh my god, look at all the blood. And they have to deal with that. And on top of that, this also happens to be the time that the Red Dragon Army, which is one of the 5 armies of the Dragon Queen that is slowly taking over Krynn, they decide to attack Vogler at that time. On purpose, which you find out eventually as you read the adventure. They planned it that way. So it changes from cool festival to, oh, people are dying, to, oh, look, the Red Dragon Army is here with these crazy half-dragon monstrosity things. And, oh, look, they're burning the town down. And so the rest of the adventure is basically them dealing with the Red Dragon Army, and then eventually realizing that the Red Dragon Army is a lot bigger than what they can deal with, and having to evacuate the town. And there's so many different things that happen in here that are going to adjust how the plot goes. Like, you can fail every single to the time, and it's going to change how the rest of the campaign goes, which I really like that. Failure should not always be your party dies, roll new characters. There should be failure conditions that allow your characters to live, but have to deal with the consequences of failure. Dying is the easiest thing to deal with because you don't have to deal with the repercussions anymore. Character's dead. Oh, good. You're done. We can start a brand new campaign. We don't have to deal with the fact that the character or the creature that your characters died to still exists and now has nothing stopping it from taking over the rest of the world. So I like that. And then again, artwork, super, super good. So yeah, that is chapter 3. Moving on. Chapter 4. Shadow of War. So, city gets evacuated, hopefully, depending on how the players do. Whomever survives that heads, follows the Vingard River, and eventually comes to the city of Kalaman. Kalaman is actually significantly more involved in the war because the Red Dragon Army has been attacking more of the things. And this is where they finally kind of get involved in the war itself. They do mention in here, they use the word conscripted. I'm trying to see if I can find it again, because I remember reading that and going, because one of the things that they recommend throughout this adventure is do everything you can to, especially the city of Vogler, make the city of Vogler as enticing as possible. All the NPCs there should be people that the characters want to get to know. Doesn't mean they all need to be, you know, oh, you're the most wonderful person ever. Let me shower you with money and riches and other things that are very nice. You don't have to do that, but they should be generally likable people that the characters can get attached to, and they should interact with the party in a relatively favorable way so that the party has some kind of stake in this war. Vogler should be the kind of motivation point for the players. Watching this city that they really enjoy, even if they were only there for a few sessions, watching this city that they got to know the people in, they got to have a lot of fun in, burn to the ground, should be something that motivates them to want to fight against this Red Dragon. And Kalaman is where they get to fight the Red Dragon army. They actually join. They actually join the war. Like I said, the one issue I had with was the idea. Somewhere I read that they were going to be conscripted. For those of you that don't know what conscription is forced military service. Back in World War I, all the way up through the Vietnam War or the Korean War, whichever one of those was after the other one. We had conscription in the U.S. It was called the draft. And if your number got called, you were required by law to join the armed forces and to be involved in war. We currently do not have the draft, though I believe all men 18 or older are still technically registered for the draft. We just haven't used it because we haven't technically been at war since Vietnam. But conscription is a tricky subject. And most people that are conscripted, not all, but I would say more than 50% of people that are conscripted because they are forced to fight in the war as opposed to volunteering, are not going to be happy about being involved in a war that they had no say on. Nothing in here that I read points to the players themselves being conscripted, where they are forced to join it. But they are massive, massive incentives for them to want to join, which is how it should be. But overall, you have a bunch of different things that you do. The first half of this chapter is a lot of role playing, which again means that the players are going to feel more connected and things like that. I'm a big fan of having role playing to be a large part. And they have stuff dealing with like the Mages of High Society. If you have anyone with that background or anyone that is an arcane spellcaster, they can deal with that stuff. If you want to be one of the Knights of Solamnia, that stuff is in here as well. So again, them linking backgrounds into the story. Excuse me. Them linking backgrounds into the story is very useful and very good. Something that, again, it's one of the reasons that backgrounds were as useless as they were for most of the lifetime of 5th edition, is that Wizards of the Coast did not put an emphasis on mentioning backgrounds. There were never things about, if you're part of this background, then you can do this. They didn't include backgrounds in any of their published materials, which is where most people learn to run the games, and therefore most DMs never used backgrounds outside of character creation. Now they're trying to use backgrounds more, and I'm a big fan of that. Now, the only backgrounds they use are the 2 that are introduced in this book, so, you know, your mileage is going to vary, but at least they're starting to do that, and I think that's an essential part into making backgrounds important again, especially when we get into D&D 1. If they want backgrounds to be important, they need to mention them in published adventures and give bonuses to characters that are going, by the way, if you're a baker, then you would know this, and this, and you can use that to get this information you couldn't normally have. You don't have to pay them or give them special magic items. You do need to acknowledge stuff like that if you want it. And then you get sent on a bunch of different missions dealing with various things. There's one where a gnome is being attacked by a bunch of goblins, and she has all these what are they called? Anyway, they're clockwork. There we go. I couldn't think of the word clockwork. These little clockwork creations of this this gnome that are fighting these goblins, and it's a really hilarious scene that involves some combat, but it's kind of just funny combat, which I really enjoy, and so that was cool. Yeah, the rest of this is basically them starting to kind of fight against the Red Dragon army, and just kind of seeing the different stuff that they're having to deal with and being a part of the war. I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to, give away, major plot points or anything. But near the end, again, they have a Warriors of Krynn thing that you can do. Or if you don't want to use the board game, you can't use the board game, you have an actual adventure that you get to run. And then again, bad things happen. An ambush happens in Kalaman, and people that I will not name die, and it kind of leads to the next plot point. Kind of very similar to how the Spelljammers adventures were run, where the end of every chapter has a bit of like a cliffhanger. The big difference being these are not designed like the Dragonlance ones were designed to be run in a very specific time frame. These were not designed to be run in a very specific time frame. But when you go from chapter to chapter, you have something that's going to encourage the characters, the players, to want to come back to know what's happening next, which I like. They also introduce a character that if you're familiar with Dragonlance, you will recognize the name immediately. And if you're not familiar with Dragonlance, the only thing you might consider is, hey, you guys! But there's a character named Soth. Not Sloth, Soth. And if you're familiar with Dragonlance, you know exactly who Soth is. And you should be very, very worried. If you don't know anything about Dragonlance, the name Soth means nothing to you until you eventually start meeting him. And the name Soth or Lord Soth starts being thrown around. At this point, you don't actually meet them here. And again, that's another thing that I think is really, really fun, is if you do have a really powerful enemy, laying the seeds that they exist early on, well before the players could even think about confronting them, is really fun, especially if they did this in Curse of Strahd a lot. Strahd would just meet with the players when they were like level 3 or level 4. And so he would come out, and Strahd is almost impossible to kill if you're a party of level 3s or 4s. So Strahd would show up and every so often just like pick a fight with them and let them make attacks and giggle, and then, you know, kill one of them or hurt one of them severely and then just walk away. And it was a really, really interesting way to kind of show that, hey, here's the big bad guy, and he is so powerful that you're not even worth killing. You're not even worth dealing with. He fights one of you, he'll punish one of you a little bit, and then he'll walk away because you guys are so weak and insufficient that it's not even worth trying to kill you. There's no reason to. It's a great motivator for players. And so starting to whisper around the name Soth and Lord Soth, especially if you have people that know Dragonlance lore, as soon as you say the name Lord Soth, they're going to go, does my player recognize, or does my character recognize that name? Because they know exactly just how fucked they are if he shows up. Whereas regular players are just going to go, do I recognize that name? And you can roll an Arcana or Religion check to figure out if you can recognize the name. So, yeah, cool stuff. So that's chapter 4. Moving on. Told you guys this is going to be 2 hours. The next chapter, chapter 5. The Northern Wastes. This is kind of like the chapter 2, where this is a bunch of different encounters and little mini adventures that the players may or may not interact with. And the amount of time you spend in chapter 5 is going to be entirely based on just how much the players are enjoying it. The Northern Waste itself, it gives you, if I remember correctly, before I say the wrong thing, I'm going to look. I believe it gives you a map of the Northern Wastes. Yeah, so it gives you a map of the Northern Wastes. And basically, the whole plot of this chapter is, well, the bad guys are somewhere in the Northern Wastes, and that's where they're coming from. So we need to start exploring this to figure out what in the hell they're doing up there. Because there's something in the Northern Wastes that they want. We've seen them there. We need to figure out why they care about it. And so this is very much, this is kind of your open world section of the game, where you literally, or sandbox section, you literally can just kind of set them down and go, where do you want to go? And they have a player version of the map. And so you can show them this map and just go, okay, this is the map. This is where you are currently. Where do you want to go? Where do you think is the best place for you guys to look around to try and figure out what's going on? And yeah, it's an incredibly effective way to give the players a lot of agency, and allow them to do what it is that they want. And then eventually, everything that they do here, they kind of sprinkle throughout this adventure. By the way, every time they meet Red Dragon Army members, they should start learning little pieces. They might hear a rumor, or they might find a missive from someone that gives them little bits and pieces to point them in the right direction. So they get to do their own thing and do whatever they want. And then as they do that, they're also getting little hints that, oh, by the way, there's something else going on. And as they fit the pieces together, it will point them towards a place called the City of Lost Names, which is the next area that they're going to go, and actually a really, really important place for the rest of the adventure. This again, the entirety of this chapter, the parts of it that you play is going to be based entirely on what your players decide to do, which I really, really like. It means that technically a lot of people don't talk about replayability in adventures too much, because most people think, well, once you've played the adventure, there's no reason to ever play it again. And I disagree with that on a number of different levels. When I was in the Adventures League, I played a number of adventures multiple times with different characters. I played adventures that I had run. So I knew everything that could happen, but it was still fun to play it. And by having things where there are aspects of the adventure that you may not get to just because they put a lot more adventure in the book than any one party is ever really going to experience, it means that if you decide that you want to run this again because it's an interesting, fun adventure with a lot of cool ideas behind it, someone that has already played this adventure can create a new character and have a different experience. And I like that. Again, right when you get to the City of Lost Names, there is a Warriors of Krynn section, which again, I think is really, really cool. Due to the fact that I am really, really broke and Christmas is coming up, I'm not going to be able to get the board game, at least until next year. But reading this, I really want to pick up the board game. Again, despite the fact that I have no one to play it with, I want to get the board game just to see how it plays, to see how it interacts with this, because it's a cool idea. And again, even if you don't play this, depending on how the board game is written, and I've played other board games that are kind of similar to the idea of different scenarios and stuff like that, if the core rules of the board game are well designed enough, any D&D campaign you're running, if you want to have a mass battle event, you can just bring out the board game and go, we're going to use this to represent our mass battle. Like, you can implement this literally anywhere. It doesn't have to have anything to do with Krynn, as long as the kind of core rules of how the system works are generic enough or easy enough to template that you can put it into any setting. So I like that. I think it's really cool. So there's a Warriors of Krynn section, like every single one. And then there's a section that, if you don't want to use the Warriors of Krynn, you get to do the RPG thing, which is still really cool and interesting. And then you don't actually get to the City of Lost Names in this chapter. You find the final picture in this chapter has a title below it called "The Dragon Army Blocks the Path Leading to the City of Lost Names." So again, throughout this entire chapter, you get these little things about the City of Lost Names and how it seems to be important to them, and it starts kind of guiding you towards it, and the chapter ends with, hey, look, an army in front of us. And that's where we're going to pick up next session. I like that. I like cliffhangers and stuff like that. I think it's really motivating for players. Moving on. Chapter 6. The City of Lost Names. Again, spoiler alert. City of Lost Names, ancient city with really cool stuff in it. There's so much here that is really plot heavy that I can't talk about a lot of specifics. But one of the aspects of this place is there is a temple to Paladin. Paladin is the Krynn equivalent of Bahamut, who is the platinum dragon god of justice. And one of the big kind of subplots here, the term Dragonlance, where the setting gets its name, is actually it's actually the name of specific items that were used in not the War of the Lance, but there was I think it was called the War of the Dragon. In previous history, there was a big war against dragons that saw them basically kick out all the dragons hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And they had these magic items called the Dragonlances. They were used by this group of people called the Dragon Riders of Krynn. And so these Dragon Riders would use these Dragonlances, and they were divine magic items that were specifically designed to kill dragons. They did more damage to dragons. They're kind of like a Sword of Dragon Slaying kind of thing, but even more focused. And they come in two versions. I don't remember If in the older versions they actually had different names for the two flavors of Dragonlance, here they're both just called Dragonlances, but one uses pike statistics and one uses lance statistics. And the big difference between them is a lance, if you're not mounted on something, you roll all attacks with a lance with disadvantage, where a pike is just a two-handed roll big spear. Part of the plot in this section is you guys have found basically in the previous chapter you eventually come across a worn Dragonlance, and you may or may not realize that's what it is, but you know it's something special. But it's obviously worn and kind of broken and stuff like that. So part of this is actually going to the Temple of Paladin and effectively reforging the Dragonlance, because being able to kill dragons is going to become really, really important real quick here. So this is another thing that can be really, really interesting and fun for the players, because getting magic items is fun. Don't get me wrong, but building magic items, forging magic items is a lot more fun. In all of the campaigns that I run, I create special magic items for each character, specifically tailored not only to the character itself, but to what's happening. And they're designed to kind of grow as the characters level up and things like that. And they react to what's happening in the story. They specifically, I will talk to the players after something big happens to their character. I go, I think this is a good time for you to get a new power for your magic item, or we upgrade the magic item, because this is what happened and this is how you dealt with it. I think the upgrade should be something along this. Like one of them is a blood hunter that has a magic sword from her father, and they eventually killed a vampire. And I'm like, well, I think because that was a big part of your backstory, they're a ghost slayer of a blood hunter, I think this would make sense for your magic item to get something new. And so we cooked up an ability where they can cause their sword to emit daylight. Not just shine, but actual daylight. Which is actually a really, really big deal, because vampires, if you kill them, they turn into mist, and then they go back to their coffin and they resurrect. The only way to actually kill a vampire is they have to be hit by daylight. Not light, not a light spell. They have to be in direct daylight. And so there is a single spell, I think it's a 5th or 6th level spell called Daylight, that you theoretically could use, but it is a high-level spell. And it requires a spell slot, and it really, all it does is it provides daylight. Like, it's not a super offensive spell or anything like that, so it's really useful killing vampires and getting rid of areas of darkness and stuff like that, but it's not going to kill dragons or anything like that, whereas there's a lot of other 5th and 6th level spells that will. So yeah, we made it so that he now has the ability to emit daylight from this blade. Because they were lower level and didn't want to give him something too powerful, we wanted to give him something, or give the player uses he him pronouns, but the character's female uses he she her. So if you see me switching between pronouns, it's because I'm talking about either the player or the character, and I conflate the two every so often. So anyway, I wanted to give the player something that connected to their backstory, connected to what they had just done. And so this whole thing, if they get to reforge the Dragonlance, I think that is significantly better than just finding a Dragonlance and being able to use it. Having to go to the temple, having to make an offering to Paladin, and actually, do some... That is so much cooler than, oh, look, you got a Dragonlance for Dragonlancing. And then, yeah, like all good Metroid games, near the end of this thing, you eventually come to You come to a place where you see a dragon with a really cool looking chair and some buddies. And you find out that the chair is what's called a flying citadel helm. It's basically a spelljamming helm for a city. Spoiler alert. And so effectively what happens is they have to deal with this dragon trying to make this city fly, and you effectively realize, oh shit, that's why they cared about this city. They're trying to basically make this entire city rise into the sky and use it as a flying fortress of death. And if they get to do that, that's real bad. They will have a leg up on everybody. And so you have to fight this dragon, and because this city is so old and broken, as soon as the dragon turns on the flying city hell, parts of the city start rising, but other parts of the city don't. And so you guys have to flee from a city that is breaking apart. Especially if you kill the dragon, because he's attuned to the flying helm, the flying citadel helm. And as soon as he breaks attunement by dying, the city falls. So yeah, really cool kind of escape scene. I love escape scenes. They're really fun. Soth appears here, and you get to deal with that. And then after dealing with that, you guys head back to the party heads back to Kalaman to kind of talk about what happened. And despite the fact that the entire city was not razed, the enemy is able to get a single flying citadel, and that leads into the next chapter. So, moving on. Thank you, computer. That's exactly what I want when I'm recording a video. But there's nothing there. Cool. So, moving on. Chapter 7, The Siege of Kalaman. Again, not going to go into tons of specifics, but the opening artwork for this is massively cool. There's this giant flying citadel that is coming to basically wipe Kalaman off the map. It looks amazing and cool. And again, without getting too spoilery, little spoilers here, the whole plot of this chapter is you have to protect the city, and then eventually you have to go into the flying citadel and deal with the shit that's going on in there. And it's, again, a really cool kind of set piece. First of all, you have to figure out, is it even possible to stop this? How are we going to do it? All of the different characters and NPCs that you've been dealing with since you first met a lot of them in Vogler, have, if they've survived up to this point, they've changed massively. And you get to kind of deal with how they're kind of growing into this war mindset that they've had to be in. And so you basically get to come back before the Citadel gets there. You get to come back and warn them, hey, this is coming. And you kind of get to do that whole, well, you know, and now we wait for the dawn kind of thing. And you get to repel some pretty wicked attacks from them, and deal with this kind of massive siege of the city of Kalaman, which is really cool. And again, you get the Warriors of Krynn scenario if you want to do it, or if you don't want to use the board game, you get to play the actual adventure part there and do some really cool stuff. There's battle maps for everything, which is really nice. You get to deal with a character called Red Ruin, who is effectively the Red Baron. If you're not familiar with World War I history, there was, I believe he was a German pilot that I cannot remember his name, but he was known by the Allied forces as the Red Baron. He flew a red plane. They used biplanes at that point. And he was considered unstoppable. If he showed up on the battlefield, people were going to die. The Red Ruin is effectively a Dragon Rider version of the Red Baron. Nobody knows what the Red Ruin's name is. They just call him the Red Ruin. And I really, really like that there is a Red Baron style character as a part of this, and you get to deal with him, which is just cool. And I love stuff like that. Eventually, again, you do find a way to get into the Citadel itself. You get to battle your way through the Citadel, which again has maps and cool stuff that you get to do. Eventually, you have to deal with some things called death dragons, which are really, really cool. Both lesser and greater death dragons, which are really, really cool. You get to deal with Soth without having to actually try and fight Soth, which would be very, very difficult. You get to deal with Lord Soth in a way, which I think is really cool. And then again, because you're in a flying citadel that once you destroy it is no longer going to be flying, you get to find a way out of the flying citadel, which is really important if you want to be like alive at the end. And then, I mean, that's effectively and that's effectively the end of it. And you basically, that's the end of the Red Dragon army, I believe. But the very end of the thing, you get a mysterious message that doesn't have a signature, but it bears the wax seal of the Blue Dragon army. Again, because the Dragon Queen is their version of Tiamat, she is exactly that. She's a 5-headed dragon when she's in dragon form. And so there are 5 different chromatically colored dragon armies, and you've dealt with one of them in this adventure. So yeah. So that is chapter 7. Moving on. Before talking about well, no, let's just go to the appendices and then I'll do my final thoughts as one big thing. So, Appendix A, Gear and Magic Items. To be perfectly honest, compared to the magic items from other adventures, there really isn't anything in here other than the Kaganesti Forest Shroud that I could see anyone ever using outside this adventure. Everything else in this adventure is so, all the new magic items and things are so tailored specifically to the story of this adventure that they wouldn't make sense anywhere else. So a lot of times when DMs buy adventures like this, they'll go to the magic items section and just check out to see, oh, are there any new magic items that I can use? And this one, not so much, to be perfectly honest. However, there is, it's not a magic item, but it's a device in here. It's called the Gnome Flinger. I'm not going to describe what it does, but it is amazing. And it is a part of the plot of, I think, Chapter 4. And it's great. I think it's amazing. Or it might be Chapter 3. I can't remember which. One of the early chapters. But overall, like I said, I mean, they describe the Dragonlance. Again, the Dragonlance is so... Or Dragonlances, there's more than one. But Dragonlances are so intrinsically tied to the Dragonlance setting that putting them in any other setting doesn't really make sense. Because the thing that makes them special is because they are connected to the Dragon Riders of Krynn. The actual mechanics, it's a +3 bonus to attack and damage rolls. And if you hit a dragon with a weapon, the dragon takes an extra 3d6 force damage. And any dragon of your choice that you can see within 30 feet of you can immediately use its reaction to make a melee attack. So theoretically, if you're a Dragon Rider of Krynn, you are riding a dragon, you go up and you hit something with the Dragonlance, the dragon that you're riding can attack as part of it. And that's really the only thing that makes a Dragonlance any different from just like a lance of dragon slaying or a sword of dragon slaying from regular D&D. So I don't really see, because again, it's so connected to the Dragonlance lore. I don't really see anyone just taking a Dragonlance and putting it in their own adventure, because you'd have to take so much of the lore of Dragonlance to make it seem like a cool item that it really kind of throws it. And then a Flying Citadel helm is a Spelljammer helm for a city. So yeah, there's no reason. Like I said, the only one, there is a magic cape that you can get that's kind of cool. But that's the only magic item I could ever see being taken out of this campaign. So yeah, it's not that they're bad, they're just very tailor-made for this campaign. Moving on. Appendix B, Friends and Foes. This is your monster manual section. They do have a table for random Dragon Army encounters, which is nice and useful if you need random encounters that you want to use during this, which will happen a lot, especially in Chapter 6 when you're in that kind of open world setting. You might use that quite a bit. As far as the creatures, there's a lot of really cool creatures in here. There's one called an Onkolox, which is... it is described as a huge undead, typically neutral evil. Onkoloxes are vicious undead creatures created from the bones of bears and other beasts. The picture of this is just creepy as hell. And so this is something that I'm, because I'm running a kind of Ravenloft adjacent, or Ravenloft adjacent campaign right now, where they're in my own domain of dread that I created. Called Crucitalia, and I totally want to throw a couple of these at them, because this is a cool looking creature. And then Death Dragons are really cool in here, but they're not really that different from Shadow Dragons that have been around for a little bit. The Draconians are really, really cool. Again, I'm not going to get into too much description of things, so I don't want to ruin exactly what they are, but the stat blocks themselves are interesting and would be fun to run, which is important. You want interesting encounters. You don't want encounters just like, who can make the numbers go down to fastest? Whoa! And then your regular stat blocks and stuff like that. Like there is Istarian Drone, which looks freaky as hell. Almost has a StarCraft Hydralisk feel to it, except it's got claws. Well, I guess Hydralisk had claws too, but yeah. Overall, like I said, none of the stat blocks are particularly kind of, I guess, surprising, but they do look interesting and well designed, and quite a few of them I've already kind of made mental notes to go, ooh, I want to keep that for this campaign, or I want to keep that for this campaign. So I like that. Moving on. Appendix C, Sidekicks. I mentioned in my review of Tasha's Culture of Everything, they added a system called Sidekicks that I thought was really, really interesting. And it was a great way to add NPCs that the players could get attached to, that could actually join them in battle, which is always the most difficult thing about adding NPCs that kind of follow the party, is it unbalances combat. Well, the Sidekick system was designed so that you could have NPCs, but it wouldn't completely unbalance combat. And it's a great way for the party to become very close to certain NPCs. Well, in this, they actually list a bunch of different NPCs that might decide to join the Kika characters. And this is actually a really great way to allow your players to play whatever classes they want and not have to worry about making them. Like if they want to play 4 rogues, let them, because if they're missing something specific, there's a bunch of different, let me see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 6 different sidekicks that are designed to kind of level up with the party, but they're not full characters. They're basically monster stat blocks that get more powerful as you go. So they're not going to massively unbalance, but they can fill a role that the party is missing if they need it. And if there isn't a role that needs filling, they can just be fun characters that the players can get attached to that can later become motivation. You know, because the NPCs are going to be technically more attached to the world than the players are, because the NPCs always live in the world, where the players are trying to imagine what it's like to live in the world. So having an NPCs that the players get really, really attached to can be a really, really useful thing for a DM, because they can have that NPC be used as motivation for the players to continue on the story. And that doesn't mean you have to threaten them with death. Like, a lot of people think that the best thing you can do is you get them really attached to an NPC and then you kill them. No, it could just be that this particular NPC kind of comes up to them, and instead of getting, you know, asked to do something from, you know, the leader of Kalaman or something, the NPC can go over and go, "Hey guys, can we talk?" "Yeah, sure. What's up, dude?" "Well, see, I just found out about this thing, and, you know, my sibling is here and they've gone missing. And so I was hoping you guys might be willing to go with me to this particular place to see if we can find them. I hope that they're not dead." That is significantly more motivating to players than, "Yes, I am the mayor of this town, and I will pay you 400 gold pieces to see if you can find out what happened to this missing group of soldiers." So, and it's not putting the life of the NPC at risk at all. And they can even go with them and fight alongside them. You don't have to threaten their life or anything like that. It's just, if it's something that's important to the NPC, that makes it more important to the players than, "Here is gold, go do adventuring" type stuff. So yeah, I love this whole thing. All the sidekicks are really interesting too. They all have artwork. They have concept artwork in here too, which is really cool. So yeah, everything about this is just great. Moving on. Appendix D and Appendix E. I'm putting both of these into the same thing because Appendix D is just story concept art, which is cool. But even for running the game as a DM, because this is just concept art, there's not a whole lot here that's going to be useful to you. It's just interesting. So I like this. I'm very, very happy that it's a part of the book, because you can kind of see how everything kind of evolved, which I think is great. But you will never use any of this when you're running the adventure. And then the final section is maps. One is of the Kalaman region and Northern Wastes. I talked about that map before. And then the other map is the continent of Ansalon, which is the poster map. And they have both a labeled and unlabeled version of both of them in here. So if you want, again, I am such a big sucker for maps because they are such an essential part of a world existing. You can say that, oh, there's all these different things, but as soon as they see a map and they can go, oh, so that's here and that's here, the world becomes that much more real. And again, especially in Chapter 6, where you're basically given, hey, here's just an empty space, where do you want to go? The map is really, really important. So yeah, that is Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen. So, final thoughts. Overall, like I said, overall, I think this is a great book. The most interesting thing about it is the integration of the board game. And I know a lot of people are going to say that this is some sort of cash grab. They're like, well, now they're forcing us to buy a board game. We don't want to buy. They're not. You do not have to use it at all. This book runs perfectly fine, never having the board game. However, giving you the option to do that opens up an entirely new world as far as running adventures goes, where every so often you can go, hey, this is a really big battle, pull out the board game, So we're going to have a really big battle and do something that you can't do in D&D. There are supplements and things like that that have tried to make kind of mass battle rules that work in D&D 5th edition. They don't. Some of them are really close to being kind of useful, but D&D 5th edition, D&D in general, is not designed for massive army-on-army battles. That's not what the system was designed for. In the same way that theoretically you can use a chainsaw to sharpen a pencil, it's not a great use of the chainsaw to do that, and it's going to be a pain in the ass to do it. Is it possible? Yes. Is it a good use of either item? No, and you're probably going to go through a lot of pencils before you get one that it actually works on. The same thing is true about D&D. D&D is a great system for what it does, and what it does is it is a high fantasy tabletop role-playing game that is designed to be a DM and multiple players, where the DM plays, creates a story and each player plays a single character. That's what D&D is designed for. And if you want to kind of modify D&D and turn it into Pokemon, where each player gets to control 6 different characters that they can switch between or something, sure, fine. If you want to try and do that, you can, but it's not what D&D is designed for. And there's probably better systems out there that do that. Mass battle is not something that D&D is designed to do well. And this is a cool way to create a perfectly viable way to do mass battle. It requires you getting an additional board game, which is expensive. But if it works, which again, I can't say it will, but if it does work, I mean, that opens up a brand new avenue and a whole bunch of different stories that you can tell that you couldn't tell before with just one additional thing. I think that's really cool and really interesting. So, yeah. Otherwise, for the rest of the book, like I said, the character options I like. I really like the Kender. I'm going to do D&D deep dive on that. The backgrounds, again, I have been harping on backgrounds since they started adding feats to them. This is the first time I have seen a background with feats that I'm not immediately going, fuck this shit. I like the backgrounds here. I think they're interesting. I think the new feats are interesting and have some interesting effects that they can have. You can definitely feel the 1D&D influence on this, or maybe this influenced 1D&D. I mean, they're both being designed kind of simultaneously right now. So we'll see if this is what 1D&D becomes. I would not be upset about it, because this is a good adventure that has a lot of interesting things. I think the story is fun. I like the fact that they put a huge emphasis on getting your players invested in their characters and having their characters connected to the world as much as you can. That's not something that a lot of adventures put a high priority on, and I think that's good. The writing is so much better in this than the other books, specifically dialogue. So much better. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that this is not trying to do something special. This wasn't, the first book that was written entirely by people of color. Or all the other things that they've been trying to kind of shove down our throat of look at how progressive we are. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I've mentioned before in my reviews of these other books, D&D had some real bad shit going back for a long time, and they needed to fix it. And I can understand that these are the attempts that they were making to do it. They just did it badly. There was a lot of better ways that they could have done it. And I don't think those adventures were entirely bad, but the writing was piss poor, specifically for the dialogue, because they were trying to do stuff that they shouldn't have been. This is just a well-written adventure that tells an interesting story that deals with kind of the realities of war to a point, without getting so much into it that it's going to be triggering to anyone. And I like that. I don't want every single adventure to change my worldview. Doesn't mean a story or an adventure that changes your worldview is bad. But I don't need my worldview changed every single time I sit at the table. Let me just have fun every so often. Again, this is a game. We do this to get away from the world and not to get more involved in it. So yeah, overall, I think it's a good thing. I'm interested to see what happens. Anyway, that's gonna be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on. All those things super important. In the comments down below, if you made it to the end of this monstrosity, I believe this is the longest in-depth review I've done. Let me know what let me know what you think about divine magic not existing in Krynn, or really just a world in general where divine magic or arcane magic or something like that doesn't exist. What are your thoughts on that? And having that part of a campaign setting. Do you think it's too limiting to players? Do you think it's a cool idea? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me. I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.